The content of the Tandem Radio program and website is intended for general information purposes only. It's not designed to provide listeners with specific and personal financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or other advice. The views expressed by show hosts, their guests, and callers are their own and should not be construed in any way as opinions of Tandem Radio or the Bridge FM network.
Tandem Radio, Saturday morning again, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time here every Saturday in a new format, new time, right here on the Bridge FM and also at tandemradio.com. You're listening to the Good News on Business. This is your host, Glenn DeLake, here every Saturday morning, as I said, at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. For those of you tuning in for the first time, we have two simple goals in our show. This segment of the show is all about business, and we're focused on business and business owners and helping people in their business careers. And we have two simple goals. The first one is to point you to Scripture. God's Word is filled with advice that can not only help you, obviously, in your life, but also help you in your business life as well. And we want you to realize that there are Scriptures there that can help you on a day-to-day basis, and we hope you'll apply that to your career or your business. In addition, we bring in guests each week that are from different walks of life, and we do our best to see if we can get some of the golden nuggets that they've learned from their wisdom and their experience in business and help you to apply that to your business so that Monday morning when you go back to work, you have something practical that you can use that'll benefit you and your career. And with those two things in mind, as I mentioned, each week we bring in a different guest, and we also have a subtitle to the show. This week's show is Business versus Government, and our guest is Jordan Rickards, who's an attorney and an accomplished writer, and we're going to be talking to Jordan in just a minute, but let's get to our scriptures for this week. Many times God puts these scriptures on my heart, and I wonder, God, what are you trying to say here? How does that tie into our title? But they always seem to tie in by the end of the show because he's in control and he knows what he's doing for sure. So let's start with 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Romans 13:1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. The theme of the show again today is business versus government, and we have someone in today, Jordan Rickards, who's an attorney, an accomplished writer, and just well-versed in politics, and I love having him on the show. Jordan, good morning, welcome.
Thanks for having me back, man. I appreciate it.
No problem, always good. I'm going to dig right in because now with our new format we have to move a little quicker, but we got a lot more to squeeze in for our audience. Business versus government. I took that right off the title of an article that you wrote recently, and I wanted to discuss that with you. But before we go there, tell us a little bit about your background and where you are today.
Well, I have my own business. I have a small law practice in Middlesex County, and I'm also involved in politics. I've run for office before. I ran for state senate, and I'm running for freeholder this year. So there are kind of two halves that make up my whole. There's the business half and there's the political half, and that's, I think, what kind of inspired me to write this article.
Now, as a business owner, you're obviously running your own practice, so that means you have your hands in everything, right?
Right.
Well, with that, I mean, I know a lot of times myself and other business owners have thought about politics or have been approached by people about politics, but never seem to be able to juggle the time. How do you handle the balance?
Well, it's very difficult, to be honest with you. Politics is basically its own full-time job, and you have a lot of nights where you're up late, and a lot of weekends not to yourself, to be honest with you. That's the discipline. That's the sacrifice.
And do you feel that there's reward in the balancing act, I should say?
Well, yeah, and as a business person, I'm sure you understand this, Glenn, you have to look at it as an investment. You're not simply, throwing your time, you're not wasting your time. You're spending time meeting people and advancing your ideas and networking, and hopefully, you hope it pays off. And, God is not frivolous, so I'm sure he's leading me in the right direction.
There you go. Now, you're running for office again. You mentioned that. What's involved in that? Let's say there's a business owner out there right now. He's working this 60-hour week because that's what business owners do, and he's getting this itch. What's involved to run for office?
Well, it's a great commitment. When I ran the first time, I used to think it was just you put your name on a ballot, and election day comes along, and people either check your name or the other guys. It involves meeting with lots and lots of people. Middlesex County has 850,000 people in it. Wow. That's 25 towns, and you got to visit all of those towns, go to all the committee meetings, you visit lots of American Legion things, you do a lot of parades, you have to probably debate your opponent at some time, you're handing out tons of literature. I mean, you mentioned 60 hours a week working. It's probably 30, 35-hour weeks, especially when the campaign really kicks off, really takes off, towards election season. So it's a huge commitment, and it costs a lot of money. If you understand that time is money and you're spending time doing this instead of working on your business, there is a financial cost to it.
And you've decided to take the conservative route, become a Republican. What's your main motivation for that?
Well, to be a Republican, first of all, I'm pro-life, and pro-life, I believe in school choice, for example, it's another Republican position, and I believe that the free market is the greatest engine of wealth creation that this world has ever seen, and that if you wanted to see the record of socialism, go look at the Soviet Union,
Right.
go look at Cuba and China. No one would want to live there. So there can really be no serious doubt as to which party the party of prosperity is. Not to politicize your show.
Right. No, we never do that here.
Yeah.
Now, you're in a county, correct me if I'm wrong, that's primarily Democratic, right?
Oh, very much so. They've won the last 20 elections.
So how do you see that as an uphill battle? I mean, how do you deal with that issue?
Well, God puts sometimes some of his best soldiers where he needs them the most. You guys don't need me in Monmouth County as much, or Ocean County. You guys win your elections left and right. This is a challenge. That's just how you have to look at it. And sometimes you don't always see the finish line, and God doesn't always reveal why exactly you're there, and his reasons are infinitely more complex than you or I could ever understand. And so I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about it. What I spend a lot of time doing is making sure I'm in the center of God's will. And as long as I'm doing that, then I sleep easy at night.
Amen. Are there rewards on the back end even if you don't win?
Sure. I mean, a lot of my clients are people who I met through politics, and really that's how I rationalize it a lot. That's how I rationalize the expense and the sacrifice.
Now, going to your article, and that's the topic of our show today, business versus government. And again, like you mentioned, I don't want to per se politicize the show, but I want business owners to realize that it's important to be aware, to be well educated, to understand how politics work, and most importantly, how it impacts your business. So on that note, you wrote this article, Business versus Government. Tell us a little bit about it.
Let me tell you why I wrote this article. Is with the economy lagging, there's becoming this common misconception that the government has to increase its role in the economy and increase spending in particular. And what I think people don't get is that government is not the sector of the economy that creates wealth.
Right.
So the more capital which is misallocated to the government, that's more capital that's not being used to expand the wealth base. And so my feeling on this, Glenn, was always that if the economy is struggling, the government should begin to take a reduced role and let the private sector begin to expand its role and invest the money that it needs to invest to expand wealth and expand capital.
Now, on that note, let's say we're thinking, at least I think you and I are on common ground, thinking our government's really going in the wrong direction in a lot of areas. How do we juggle with a scripture like Romans 13:1? Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. How do we juggle with that?
I think for one thing, you have to distinguish between someone which is an authority and someone which is a power. For example, one of the, Hitler was a power. He was not an authority. I'm not comparing our government to Hitler. I'm giving you an extreme example to illustrate the point. In a democracy such as our own, there is nothing wrong with principled and respectful dissent. It's expected. We're supposed to participate in government because each of us have a vote, so each of us are, to some extent, our own authority. So I don't think that this is in conflict at all to educate people and explain why government has its limitations and to appreciate those limitations.
So in the next segment, I want to talk more about how business owners can impact that and have a direction on that. But what are some of the other areas we should be concerned about that maybe your article highlights in this business versus government concept?
I think people need to understand that I'm not simply picking private sector over government because I happen to be in the private sector. That there are certain inefficiencies that are built into the nature of government itself that make it so that it can't create wealth, and actually that it uses wealth inefficiently and destroys wealth.
And can you give us some more specific examples of where you see the blatancy that government's gone off track?
Well, I can. If we had a very, very long segment, I could be here all day. One of the most obvious things is that businesses have uniform goals, whereas governments operate against themselves. One of the things I mentioned, Glenn, we have all kinds of government programs that are designed to discourage people from smoking, and we have government programs that subsidize the same people who grow the tobacco. We have government programs designed to discourage illegal immigration and government programs that are designed to entice illegal immigrants to come here. government programs that make drug use illegal, and government programs that will give out free syringes to people who want to use drugs.
Right.
No business would ever operate this way.
Right.
So
A house divided can't stand
Exactly.
itself, right?
Exactly.
That's a great point, Jordan. Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you into you there, but we were coming up on a break, and like you said, we could do a whole show just on that question. And I want to thank you again for being here this morning. You're listening to Tandem Radio. We're here every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. The new time, kicking off with a new series of shows, and just excited about the 90-minute segment that we have here on the Bridge FM. And we'll be expanding from there, so make sure you stay tuned. We have so much going on here at Tandem. We have the Tandem Network, we have Tandem Path, and also we have Cooper Ford and his show Ask Tandem. You can go on YouTube and check that out if you enjoy video segments, especially for the younger set, for those who are either in college or just coming out, the young professionals, people like Jordan, for example, who are out there in the field and making it happen and are looking for some exciting and dynamic input from the business sector. We can help you with that at Ask Tandem. All you have to do is go on YouTube and check that out. We have so much more coming up for you in the next segment with Jordan Rickards here at our show, talking about business versus government here on the Good News on Business. Welcome back to Tandem Radio. Okay. Welcome back to Tandem Radio. This is your host, Glenn DeLakin, again, here at our new time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on the Bridge FM radio station. Again, you're listening to the Good News on Business, and our subtitle for the show today is Business versus Government with Jordan Rickards, who's an attorney and also running for office, and just excited to have him on the show because he's also an accomplished writer and just has some unique insights. Before we get back to Jordan, our scriptures for today, 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Romans 13:1, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. And we're talking with the subtitle today, Business versus Government, because it's a title that I took right off of Jordan's article about that subject. Jordan Rickards, welcome again.
Thank you, Glenn.
It's always good to have you. So Jordan, we're talking about your article, and obviously there's issues, especially I think in my lifetime and in my career, and I've spanned multiple presidents, I've never seen a more anti-business climate than I see right now. And it's kind of funny because in my town 7 years ago, I formed an organization because it was such an anti-business climate, and we've been able to turn it around 180 degrees in that town, and 200 members stepped up to this organization and support it now on a regular basis. It's pretty powerful in the community. With that in mind, obviously we see this issue. Mm-hmm. Is this a Democrat versus Republican issue, or is it a government issue?
No, it's a government issue. I mean, there's the old saying that Democrats promise you everything regardless of whether or not they can pay for it, and Republicans are the party that say government can't work, and then they get elected and they prove it.
There you go.
We have $17 trillion right now in debt, and we have $61 trillion in debt and unfunded liabilities, which is more money than there is in the entire world. We can't pay it. And the reason this happened, really it started during President Bush's term back in 2002, when a law that very few people know about expired. It was called pay-as-you-go, or pay-go. And what that meant, Glenn, was that if you wanted to increase spending, you had to find the money for it. And if you wanted to give a tax break, you had to decrease spending to match.
That's almost common sense.
That's how businesses run.
Correct.
The problem is in 2002, President Bush and his Republican Congress allowed this to expire, didn't renew it because they didn't want to put restraints on themselves, and drove up the deficit massively.
Wow.
George Bush inherited a balanced budget. By the time he had left office, he was running, I think, nearly a $500 billion deficit, if not closer to a full trillion.
Wow. So it's obviously government gone off track. And I think, unfortunately, in the last 4 or 5 years, with the current administration, it's gone off track even more and continues to go that way. So let's talk about a couple of more things in your articles, and then maybe we can get back to where business owners fit in here and how we can maybe turn the tide if possible. First off, you mentioned things like reverse incentive. Let's talk about some of those things in your article.
Well, reverse incentive means that government rewards certain programs and certain people for doing a bad job. Look at private schools versus public schools. A private school has to give out a good product, or else people just won't go to it. They won't part with their money to send their kids to this school. But our failing public schools are paid to fail. If you look at our urban public schools, where half the kids don't graduate and half of those who do are functionally illiterate, those schools get far more money than the suburban schools. In New Jersey, it's
Right.
about $25,000 per student versus $15,000
Wow.
per student. Because the worse those schools get, the more money they get.
Pump it, right.
Ronald Reagan had a quote. He said, if you serve a kid a rotten hamburger, the government comes in and shuts you down. If you give a kid a rotten education, they give you more money to do it with. And that's something that doesn't exist in the world of business.
That's incredible. And other things you mentioned also in your article, like motivations and people's thoughts on elections and so forth. Talk more
Sure.
about that.
Well, politicians, people think the government exists to do a good job for us. The government is the politicians, and politicians are thinking only about being reelected.
Right.
Okay, and what that means, and what we've seen getting back to the debt, is that they will borrow money from future generations of Americans in order to finance the programs they want to give to present voters. They're literally buying votes by borrowing from some future voter when they're not going to be around. So it's an entirely different motivation. I mentioned, I think earlier to you, Glenn, about how the first role of business is to do what? It's to balance its books.
Right.
Politicians never have to balance the books because they can always raise taxes or borrow more money.
Right.
The problem is eventually you run out of people who will loan you money, and you run out of people you can tax, and you destroy the engine of capitalism that creates the wealth. But hopefully by the time that happens, the people who are in power now aren't around anymore, and they don't worry about it.
With that in mind, right, we have this runaway train, it appears, and people are screaming and yelling. You hear some new candidates like coming out now and talking about some what seems to be very common sense things, but they don't seem to be getting traction. Like Rand is out there talking about some very interesting topics, and some of these other politicians. But it seems as though these common sense politicians seem to be bowled over with the craziness. I mean, how do we get traction on this?
You have to understand, first of all, people hear what they want to hear. And so when you're talking to somebody, you can't debate them. Rand Paul just spoke at Howard University recently. First white Republican to speak there in this predominantly black school in years. No one can even remember when the last time it happened. And what you have to do is you have to talk to people the way Bill Clinton did. Bill Clinton didn't debate people. When you're talking to someone who has a different view than you, it's easy to get into a debate.
Right.
Instead, you have to listen to them, show them that you're listening to them, and explain simply to them, if you have a disagreement, why you disagree, but also explain where you have common ground. We both want a government, for example, that helps you pay for your education, for example. But how do we create the prosperity that allows for the government to have that kind of financing? And so when you establish common ground with people, as opposed to being in a position of enmity, then I think people are a lot more receptive to your message.
And do you see the Republican Party stepping up to do that?
No. If I'm being honest with you, that's why I got involved in politics, because I'm still young enough to be naive enough to think that one person can make a difference. And I was the candidate who I wanted to see the most, who I wanted to vote for. And so I get involved in politics to set an example, and to come on to shows like this and to implore other Republicans and other Democrats too to do the same thing and start to build bridges and start to try to really work toward a common ground of putting us on sound financial footing so that the business sector can prosper and we can create the jobs that everyone wants us to create.
You said something there, quickly, naive enough to believe that one person can still make a difference. I think that's a powerful statement. Is that still possible? I mean, isn't that the essence of the American heart, that one person can make a difference, yet we're seeing that not happen so much?
We're seeing what's happening is that the government is putting a lot of barriers in front of the one person who wants to make a difference. But Glenn, when that happens, you have a choice still. You can say, all right, the heck with this, I'm going to go home and I'll just let the barriers become too big for me, or you can try to push through anyway.
Right.
And I've chosen, as have you, because you're doing this show and you have a great ministry, that we want to try to push through and restore America, because there is going to come a time when we can't borrow more money, and the value of the dollar collapses, and people are going to look for answers. And I want to be in a position to be able to give people those answers when that happens, and hopefully to be able to give it to them ahead of time so it doesn't happen.
Real quickly, what does that look like? When does the government stop making money, or I should say, printing money, literally?
Well, what's going to happen eventually is you'll see the bond rating begin to go down. As the bond rating goes down, because we're more and more in debt, the cost to borrow money increases. As the cost to borrow money increases, it becomes prohibitively expensive for us to borrow money, and fewer people are willing to lend us the money. And when that happens, then all of a sudden people stop getting their Social Security checks, they stop getting their Medicare checks, You're talking about comprehensive financial shutdown. Just study the Weimar Germany to see what happens when you all of a sudden try to inflate away your debts, and you can't get bread off the shelves. I mean, that's the cataclysm that's the extreme example, but America is not immune to economic realities. We are an extraordinary nation, and we're an exceptional nation, but
contrary to popular belief.
Yeah, but we're not exempt from economic principles.
Right. So there is a time where we may come to an end, and the thing I'm afraid of is that the average person doesn't think that's even possible.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. The average person right now probably has about $50,000 in household debt imposed upon them by the government, and they don't see how it affects them. But eventually every bubble bursts. That's the great principle of economics, and it bursts just as, when the expansion of cheap credit becomes too great and you can't borrow any more money. And the bigger you are, the harder you fall when that happens, and we're pretty big right now.
Well, if you want a practical experience of that, go out tomorrow and take every dollar you have and throw it at every problem you have and see how long that lasts.
Right.
And you'll find out reality where things could end up. And I pray that God will intervene long before that. But idea comes down to 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Our land definitely needs a healing, and Jordan, I want to thank you for being one of those stand-up guys that rattles the cage a little bit to let people know that, hey, something's coming and it's not looking good.
Thank you, Glenn. I appreciate it.
No problem. We'll have you on again because I love your writing, and I really appreciate the opportunity to put that on our website at tandemradio.com, where you can find out all kinds of resources, including we'll throw some of Jordan's articles up there. Tandemradio.com, just a great resource for you. Email us at info@tandemradio.com. That's info@tandemradio.com. Stay tuned for the next hour of Tandem Radio. A lot coming up in it. You don't want to go anywhere. Keep that dial where it is. You'll have a lot of great information about business. We'll see you right here back at this same station and also at tandemradio.com every Saturday morning at 10:30 a.m. for 90 minutes of programming that you're just going to love about business. Stay tuned.